Hey, this is Meredith Elliott Powell. I'm the author of Thrive, Turning Uncertainty into Competitive Advantage. And the best business advice I ever got is that if you build your network, it will change your life. Always talk to strangers. You don't know where it's going to lead you.
Wow. Build your network. I love that, Meredith. So where did you learn that? Where were you in your career and who told you that?
It was actually my mother, and I was maybe 5 years old. And just like everybody else's mother tells them not to talk to strangers, my mother insisted that I did. When I was a little kid and we'd go to the playground or we'd go to the pool, she would always point out children that didn't have somebody to play with and told me it was my responsibility that anytime I walked into a room, if somebody didn't have a friend, it was my responsibility to make sure that people were having a good time. Now, I hated that as a kid, but it turned out to be the best lesson anybody ever gave me because it's through my network that everything good has ever happened to me.
Wow. That's so fascinating. Mom would tell you that at 5 years
Oh,
old. My
yes.
goodness. What's your mom do? Like, how did mom get this insight?
I don't know. My mother was not one to tell her daughters to go into business. In fact, I was really steered away from that as a child. But she felt like the mark of a lady was somebody who made other people feel comfortable. And she said that that the best thing you can ever be is approachable. For people to believe that they can come up and they can engage you in conversation, and you're easy to talk with. And as a child, I always hated that. I was actually pretty shy as a kid, but it really served me well in life. Every time I walk into a room, I feel this big burden of responsibility to go talk to strangers and make sure that people have somebody to talk with. But it has led to the most interesting conversations. She added to that the other thing is don't ever talk about yourself because that's not what people want to talk about. So that was helpful as well.
Wow. That's great. I mean, those two pieces of advice alone, right? Those are freaking gold. That's so
Unbelievable.
interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so were you kidnapped as a child? Did you walk in a white vans or were you safe? I'm just curious.
It is funny because it sort of backfired on her. Is that if my car would break down, I'd just stick my thumb out and I'd crawl into anybody's car, and those types of things. So it probably wasn't the exact advice that she meant. I've probably always been a little overly friendly, but no, she just always really encouraged me to talk to strangers. And maybe you don't want to go that far, but it's one of the biggest mistakes I see people make is that they go to an event, they go to a party, they go to, something where anybody is already there, and you spend your time talking to those people that you've already built relationship with. You're just missing an unbelievable open door, because I really believe that at any moment in life you're only one connection away from somebody who can help you achieve anything you want.
Yeah. Awesome. I agree with that. I think that is so true, and that's so interesting that people miss that they take,
Yeah.
because truly the hardest part is to find something in common. Well, you're both at
Yeah.
the same place. Like, talk about that. Why are you here? And why
Right.
are you here? And now we can share a little bit. So that's, yeah, I totally agree. That's so good. So with that though, you said in person, and that's a challenge now, right?
Yeah.
For some people, right? We're at best hybrid. Nobody's always in person in our business, right? In fact, I read an article this morning. Is field sales dead? Like, is
Yeah.
it all going to be inside telephone and Zoom calls? So Meredith, what are you seeing out there? Because I know you're still crushing it, both virtual as well as hybrid and in person. So what are you seeing with the businesses you're consulting and working with?
I think a lot of this virtual is going to stay, especially when it comes to sales, because it's easy, it's effective, it's efficient. I mean, I can make so many sales calls today sitting here in my house than I can if I had to get on a plane or I had to get in a car. At the same time, we're human beings. I just was in fact, we had to reschedule this because I went to Key West. And the reason I went to Key West was a team was getting together that hadn't been together since COVID started. And I just did a debrief before this with that client. And I said, how did the rest of the meeting go after I left? And she said, It was phenomenal. We did more in 3 days being together than we had done in 18 months because they'd hired new people. So I think it'll very much be a blend. But, whether you're meeting people virtually or whether you're meeting them in person, the biggest thing to remember is that treat it like it is an in-person event. Is that ask questions, learn about people, make people feel comfortable, and be willing to listen. I mean, you talked about common ground. If you listen, you'll always find common ground.
Yeah, I agree. I think listening is very underrated as a skill. And I think even now more, it's often what people are not saying that's
Mhm.
super important. And being that inclusive person that says, well, Jane, I haven't heard from you yet.
Yes.
What's your input? And I think it's easier to facilitate that because I can see people's facial expressions. I mean, even if or I can see if they turn their camera off, maybe they're more introverted and maybe they need that recharge time and maybe they only want to be on camera a little bit, or they're not neurotypical. I learned last week, one of my friends posted, in her organization, they had a day-long meeting. They made them keep cameras on. She was sick for 3 days after that because of the stress of that, because she's
Oh.
not used to meeting, even in person. She was used to putting her headphones on and focusing. So it's really interesting how this has made us aware of things that we were never aware of before. But I think that goes really well with your book. I mean, I think, this new book about thriving is so important, right? You call it Thrive, strategic strategies to turn uncertainty to competitive advantage. And I read this when it came out. You're one of my friends from the National Speaker Association.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, this is great. So where did you figure out that Thrive was going to be where you were and kind of your word for 20 and 21?
What's funny about Thrive is that I started writing that book in 2018, long before we had ever even heard of COVID or thought that a pandemic would so radically change our lives. But back in 2018, the economy was red hot. I mean, everybody's business was doing well. And as I would talk to people and engage with them, we always ask the question, how's business? And everybody answered the same. Business is good. Business is great. In fact, we're headed for our best year on record, but oh, this uncertainty. And I just started to think everybody is plagued by uncertainty. And why does it always have to be a negative? Why does it always have to be a bad thing? And what would happen in your organization if you flipped the script on that? If you started to think about uncertainty as a positive, if you intimately believed that uncertainty could be your greatest advantage, could be your greatest opportunity, what would happen to your team and how far could you go? And that was the question I wanted to answer. And then my business took off in 2018 and 19, and I didn't have time to finish the book. And then COVID hit and my business blew up, just like your business blew up. We all blew up. And I went back to the research and I completed the book at that time, which really turned out to be a blessing because it was so much more a powerful book because I had experienced decimation in my own business and was able to apply the strategies to what I was doing.
Wow. Uncertainty being our greatest advantage and the timeliness of that cannot be understated. I think that's so interesting because this is for every person that's like, oh my gosh, this is awful. For some of us, I mean, this has turned into be something great, right? Something maybe not exactly what we had or exactly what we expected, but it absolutely can be an advantage. So give me an example of where you saw this show up, because you've done a ton of research. And I
Yeah.
love the historical stuff and then how we compare that to today. So give me one of those fun stories that you have from the book that's really
Yeah,
powerful.
so I'll give you one historical and I'll give you one present day. One of the strategies in the book is the fact that you really can make money in the middle of uncertainty. In fact, it's one of the easiest and best times to make money is in the middle of massive disruption. But you have to understand in order to do that, you grow your business from the inside out, meaning that when uncertainty hits, most of us start to look for new business or start to look for any business we can find. That's not the way to grow. The way to grow is to look internally, is to start with your existing customers and ask them, how's business? How are things going? What's the biggest problem you're facing right now? If you could solve one problem in 2021, what would it be? And then listen, because what your customers are about to give you is gold. rock solid gold. They're about to tell you what their biggest problem is. See, you have to understand that what you sold before the uncertainty hit and what you're selling now, two different things. Products may be the same, but the problem is different. I'll give you a quick example. Procter and Gamble is a company that we all know, better known as P&G today. But what a lot of people don't know about Procter and Gamble is that Procter and Gamble was started in the early 1800s by two men, Procter and Gamble, who married sisters. And they both had businesses and they competed for animal fat. And one night at a dining room table in Cincinnati, Ohio, they were fighting over animal fat when their future father in law said, "Boys, why don't you quit competing and why don't you start a business?" And Procter and Gamble was born. Now, the first product that they wanted to put on the marketplace was soap. Now, I don't care what you sell, there can't be a bigger commodity out there than soap. So they had to find the differentiator in the marketplace. They had to find what would give them strategic advantage. So rather than sit around a dining room table and try to figure it out, they went out and they talked to customers. And they asked customers what they like about soap, what they don't like about soap. And what they found was rock solid gold. They found that customers like soap. Customers wanted to use soap. But the problem with soap was when you use it, you lather it up, it'll slip out of your hands, fall to the bottom of the bathtub, and you can't find it. And customers told Procter and Gamble that they wanted a soap that floats. Procter and Gamble took that line, shot air into a bar of soap, and Ivory soap was born. And it became the soap that floats. Please understand, they didn't change it to a soap that didn't sink. By using exactly the right problem that their customers had given, they became $1 million company by the end of the 1800s. If you want to grow in the middle of an uncertain environment, you have to solve the right problem. Now, I'll tell you a quick up-to-date story. Another strategy in the book is that competition becomes collaboration. In the age of uncertainty, the problems we face are too big for one company, one individual to solve on their own. So we have to stop competing and we have to start collaborating. There's a great story about McDonald's and Aldi grocery stores, both companies that were labeled companies that were allowed to stay open during this pandemic. They were vital businesses, essential businesses is the word I was looking for. But McDonald's, while essential, was really in most communities only allowed to keep their drive-throughs open. So they found themselves with all these extra employees. Now they didn't want to furlough those employees, but they couldn't keep them on the payroll because they weren't doing as much business that they had done before the pandemic hit. Enter Aldi grocery stores. Aldi grocery stores had the opposite problem because we all had this desperate need to buy toilet paper. Aldi grocery stores had to stay open 24/7. And the problem they had is they didn't have enough labor to do that. Add to that, some people didn't feel comfortable coming to work in the age of the pandemic. So rather than competing, McDonald's loaned their employees to Aldi grocery stores. Now, what McDonald's got was they got loyalty from those employees. They didn't have to furlough employees that had been loyal to them. They got to get those employees off their payroll. But when things would turn around, they would get to bring those employees back. Aldi grocery stores got the opposite. They got a well-trained, excited, and motivated temporary workforce, people that they could bring in for the short term, but they weren't ultimately going to have to lay them off. So in the wake of a pandemic, stop competing. Once you understand your biggest challenges, start thinking about who you can collaborate with. It's not that you can't solve your own problems, but time, energy, resources, the faster you can figure the challenges out, the more successful you're going to be in the age of uncertainty.
Wow, that's so interesting that even today, right? That works out. I mean, the P&G story is classic.
It's
I love
classic.
that, right? That's such a great story. But McDonald's and Aldi, I mean, who would think that those two could work together? So how did I mean? Do you know more about that story? Like, how did they identify that each one had what the other needed?
Well, luckily, McDonald's, while every other fast food chain was busy furloughing employees, figuring out they had a problem and immediately going to the short-term solution, McDonald's had somebody within the company who just really started to think, who just really had empathy, which is something you need at a time that uncertainty hits, and say, how can we solve our problem creatively? How can we do it by helping our employees rather than hindering them? The other is, remember, if you were able to keep your workforce fully engaged, you stood a better chance of getting the PPP money and being in better position that way. It's just about really about thinking bigger. And luckily, somebody within the walls of McDonald's thought that way and approached Aldi grocery stores, and it was just everybody won. And that's the beautiful thing about collaboration, is when, competition is about me beating you, Phil. But if I think about how we can collaborate, you're going to win and I'm going to win. We all make out. And in times of uncertainty, that's what you need. I mean, you think about what we did with supply chains and things like that. It wasn't about one store selling toilet paper why nobody else could. It started to become, how could we all work together to do it?
Wow. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. The crazier the time, the crazier the possible solutions and the potential. So I dig that a bunch. So, how do we get ourselves conditioned for change, though? That's one of the chapters in your book
Yeah.
that resonated the most with me. And that is, we can prepare ourselves for change, even if it's not changing right now. So, how do we do that, Meredith?
Yeah, this is probably one of the most important chapters of the book. The change gurus and the change experts tell us that we need to manage change. But in the wake of uncertainty, if you're managing change, you're behind. You already lost. It's too late. The one thing that we know is that what we're experiencing right now, it's going to be different 6 months to 12 months. So conditioning for yourself for change is about saying, I'm not going to wait for change to happen. I'm going to actually predict the changes in the marketplace. See, change can be your greatest opportunity if you see it coming. It's if you ignore change, it's going to bury you. So change is like a muscle. The more you work it, the more you think about it, the more you talk about it, the more conditioned for change. So, what I suggest to my clients to do, and what we wrote about in the book, is that every month or every quarter, we want you to sit down and really brainstorm what's happening outside of your business. Because in an uncertain marketplace, there's more happening outside of your business than inside it that can impact your ability to be successful. So for this, we use a tool. It's a tool called a skeptic, just a series of words that you just brainstorm. What changes do you see happening in society? What changes do you see happening with competition? What changes do you see happening economically, politically, with technology, industry, customers? I'll repeat it. Society, competition, economics, politics, technology, industry, customers. And you just brainstorm what you see happening in those particular areas. What that does is it gets your mind thinking about how the marketplace is shifting. How is the world in which you do business, in which you sell? What are the shifts happening in the marketplace? And then you ask yourself, what, if any, of those shifts do we need to be paying attention to? The company that we highlighted in the book for this was Jim Beam. Imagine, you want to talk about uncertainty. Imagine trying to run a business when something like prohibition was threatening to come down on you at any time. I mean, at any moment, your own government could make what you do for a living completely illegal. Now, nobody believed that prohibition would actually become law, and Jim Beam didn't even believe it, but he decided to prepare for it anyway. What if? What if those laws actually got passed? How would my business have to change? So before prohibition became law, before it became illegal to make liquor or to drink liquor, he decided to invest in the mining industry and buy land to grow citrus in Florida. So when prohibition hit, all of his competitors were busy declaring bankruptcy, but he had enough cash flowing through the business to protect his family recipe and to once again start thinking about the shifts coming in the marketplace. Because while prohibition became law, Jim Beam never believed it would remain law. And again, he saw the writing on the wall long before anybody else did. He was able to gather investors together. And when prohibition was repealed, despite the fact that he was 70 years old, He and his family rebuilt their distillery, and within 3 days, they were up, open, and operating once again. Your success is about seeing what's coming and preparing for it now.
Wow. Wow. So it's almost as if, seeing around corners can actually be trained instead of something that can't be
Absolutely.
trained, right? So it's something we
Yeah.
can do. I love your skeptic tool, though. So society, competition, economy, politics, technology, industry, and customers.
Very good. You got it.
Right? So smart, right? To have those 7 things that we think about, that we can think about outside of us. Now, with that, Meredith, you talk about Jim Beam, but has there been anybody recently? Do you have a case study recently of anyone who's done
Oh,
this
yeah.
especially well?
I think one of the greatest recent ones. I've got a couple of clients of mine, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But one of the best examples out there is the difference between not Netflix and Blockbuster. I mean, Netflix paid attention to the fact that the shifts were coming in the marketplace. Blockbuster did not, and that is exactly the writing on the wall. But like I've got a client right now that is in the healthcare space, and the we use this tool religiously every quarter with his team. And right as the election started to change and it looked like Biden was probably going to win, that would mean a windfall into the money that was going to be available for healthcare. So a good year before the Democrats came into office, he started repositioning what products and services he was going to sell based on where the availability was going to be, if the Democrats came into office. I had the flip of that happen with a state a company that I was working with that is in the solar energy space. 75% of their income was from state reimbursement if people would put solar panels. Well, we saw the writing on the wall that the Republicans were probably going to win the House and win the Senate. And with that would go their reimbursements for solar energy. So again, we were 18 months ahead with that, and we're able to diversify the income stream based on the fact that the election was not going to stay in our favor. So you have to understand that. I did it again with a company that is in they produce bottles for Coca-Cola, and soda doesn't have a long life of. There's such an anti-move against sugary drinks. So we started to move to get into bottling water because that would be a safer diversification of the income stream. So it's about understanding that, your world is shifting out there now, doing it with community colleges right now. And as we look at competition in society, people need to be trained to be plumbing contractors and to be electricians. So we're starting to shift the services that we're offering within the community college based off what the need is going to be for quote unquote their customers. So it's about reading what's happening in the marketplace, accepting reality. Like, you can be hell bent that you want to continue to do what you want to do, but your marketplace is shifting. If you pay attention to that, that's how you're going to thrive in the midst of it.
Yeah. Paying attention, again, another underrated skill, but so
Yeah.
important to get out there, right? And use the skeptic tool that Meredith mentioned to get out there and listen and see everything that's at play so you can move ahead of that. With that, I've got one more piece of the book that I want to talk about because the book is great, by the way, Meredith.
Thanks.
Fantastic. Yeah, congratulations, right? Thrive is an excellent book. If you're thinking about a new book, friends, pick up a copy of the book. But let's talk about one more piece of it, and that is in your strategy number 8 here, shedding fast and keep moving. Talk to me about that one because I think this is one that a lot of people can benefit from if they only are willing to try.
Yeah, I love that you pointed that out because it's so true. Probably one of the biggest frustrations I see for people in business right now is they're working so hard and it isn't working for them. You have to realize that in an uncertain marketplace, through no fault of your own, the strategies that you're using get out of date. I mean, what I did in January doesn't necessarily work in June, doesn't necessarily work in September. Not my fault. It's because the marketplace shifted around me. And so shed fast and keep moving is a way that you objectively look at your business. Again, we do it every quarter. You just step outside of your business, and there's a tool that we use called a seeds, a weeds, and a needs. And seeds are, you ask yourself, in the last 3 months, what have we done that really worked? What really brought us business? What do we need to keep doing, or what do we need to do more of? Weeds are what's weighing us down, what's holding us back, where are we wasting time and energy? And needs are what do we need to be doing that we're not doing that could really take the business to another level? So, again, it's about objectively looking at your business and asking yourself, what's focusing, what's working, what isn't. I'll give you a great example. At the beginning of the pandemic, right when things first happened 18, 19 months ago, I just started calling my clients and asking them how I could help. I mean, all the business had disappeared from my books, and nobody knew where they were economically, so I was just volunteering to do anything I could do and not charge. And that was really working for me because I was getting visible with people again. I was getting in the door with people. I was positioning myself in the marketplace. But 6 months later, I realized that doing free work wasn't working anymore. A, people didn't need it. They were getting funds. B, it was not working for me because I wasn't able to pay the bills. So a strategy that had been working for me was a strategy that I needed to stop. I needed to adjust, and I needed to change. So again, through no fault of your own, some things that you're doing aren't working anymore. You just need to back up and adjust.
Awesome. Awesome. I love the seeds, weeds, and needs. Super simple and super
Yeah.
understandable and super actionable. I really, really love that. So, Meredith, as we're closing up here, how do we get started on this? How do we get started towards thriving so we can be more competitive, so that we can take this crazy uncertain time and kick other people's butts in a collaborative sense, right? Where do we get started?
Number one is you got to work on your mindset. I mean, that's probably the biggest thing, is that you have to really do the work to start to see the opportunity and uncertainty. And one of the best exercises I can give you for this is, first of all, write down everything you're worried about, everything that you're controlled about, you're fearful of, everything that's keeping you up at night. You're worried that your business won't come back. You're worried that you're not going to be able to sell enough. You're worried that there will be another strain of COVID and back indoors we will go. Everything that you're worried about, put it out there, and then divide it into two piles. Divide it into what you can control and what you can't control. Because the biggest thing that I learned about this research is the only difference between people who succeed and people who don't. The biggest and only difference is people who succeed focus on what they can control and they forget about the rest. Now, I think that's amazing, because I just told you that the most important thing that you need to be successful, the only thing that really matters, is something you have 100% control over. You control what you focus on. So do that exercise, because you need to get the fear out of your body. Don't ignore it, but put it out on a piece of paper. Ask yourself every time you're worried about something, can I control it? If you can, put your time and your energy there. I had just mentioned to you that my husband had foot surgery. So I've been running around being a nurse and stuff. It's pretty traumatic surgery. He's going to be laid up anywhere from 6 to 9 months. Now, we have a lot of fear. Is the surgery going to work? Is he going to be able to return back to the things that he's going to be able to do? Could he get an infection? But we've had to really lay out what we can control and what we can't control. We can control his nutrition. We can control his physical therapy. We can control making sure that our friends and our family are around to keep the attitude up. We can control those things. And that's where we're putting our time and our energy.
Wow. That's a great lesson for all of us. So get it out of your system, write it
Yep.
down.
It's got to come out.
Yep, get it out, right? And then focus on what you can control in that big pile, because that will help you be successful. So
Absolutely.
much great stuff today, Meredith. I love all of it. Growing your business from the inside out, solving the right problem, remembering that competition becomes collaboration, conditioning yourself for change. We've got a skeptic tool, we got a weeds, seeds, and needs, and then focus on what you can control. Super awesome stuff, Meredith. So if people want to get a copy of Thrive, they should we send them to your website or send them to Amazon, or where do you like for them to go?
Either one. They can go to my website, valuespeaker.com. You can find the book there, and a ton of free tools and resources. But you can also find it on Amazon as well. And again, in the book, we not only focus on how you thrive in uncertainty in your professional life, but the last segment is all about how to thrive in your personal life too.
Awesome. Awesome. So such great stuff. Friends, if you're listening, if you're watching, take the time, go get a copy of this book. It's called Thrive, Strategies to Turn Uncertainty to Competitive Advantage. My friend Meridith Elliott Powell. She's valuespeaker.com. Get to know her, connect with her on LinkedIn. If you have questions, I know she's available. Happy to help you always. And take some time. Focus on what you can control. You can thrive. Thanks everyone for listening. And Meridith, thank you very much.
Thank you, Phil. Always love being with you.